Actualizing Our Gestural Imagination, Telling Stories That Live, is a teaching session with award-winning author and storyteller Rafe Martin. The audience was the Boulder Valley Spellbinders of Boulder, Colorado.
It's not a performance. We're really going to be exploring basically the gestural imagination and its relationship to our work as storytellers. So it's really kind of, we set this up so long ago. It's almost like doing this in another world. This was set up in the world before this one. So much has changed in this last year. So I hope everybody's doing okay. I think it's really remarkable that you're able to maintain your regular meetings and stay together as a storytelling community. I think that's getting rarer and rarer these days. So congratulations to you on that. So there's really two provisos that I'd like to start with, just to keep in mind with whatever I'm going to be saying today. First, I'll mostly be talking about traditional tales. That's what I've mostly been interested in, the traditional imagination. And mostly, most directly applicable in terms of what I'm speaking about will really be the process of when you find a story in a book that you want to tell and how that translates into a telling. So please kind of modify whatever I'm saying for you personally in terms of the kind of storytelling you like to do and aim to do. But all of this should be relevant, okay? Any things anyone wants to bring up before we go into anything further? No? Okay. Can you hear okay? Yeah, good. Okay. So, first of all, as we all know at this point, storytelling is a minimalist art. It's actually a very mysterious art form when you think about it. All that a storyteller can do is to use the fundamental, what should we call them, tools of body, speech, and mind. That's it. I mean, we're just human beings, and it's very strange to be a human being, if you haven't yet noticed that. I mean, when you're telling stories or listening to stories, all that someone is essentially doing is making sounds on the air and moving their face and their body a little bit. That's it. Which means that everything you see is something that's created in your own mind, but it's created by, interactively, the particular sounds on the air and the particular body or facial movements that the storyteller is using. But when you really look into it, it's really a weird art form. I mean, here's a disgusting image for you, but remember, this is just sounds on the air, so whatever you do with it, that's your business. But if your head gets cut open, they're never going to find any of the characters, any of the scenes, any of the memories, any of the thoughts, any of the experiences you've had either in life or from reading or from hearing or from telling stories. They find skull and bone and blood and, the joke is if you're lucky, brains. But that's it. So we're really going into an unknown dimension when we work with stories and words. Nobody knows where the mind is. We know where the brain is well enough, but we're exploring, we're adventuring into the mind. And this is strange territory. Materially, we don't know where it is, and it goes back to the earliest roots of human creativity, this exploration of image and language. So we're the heirs of a very ancient tradition, and I think it's still one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful one, because it is the most interactive, whether we realize that or not. That's what we're doing. We're just making sounds and simple movements, and out of that we can create worlds, characters, experiences that become memorable, part of people's lives. So stories are primarily words, as we know. Sounds on the air. But when you're telling stories for a live audience, if they're only words, they won't come alive. It's flat. When you're writing a book, when I'm writing a book, I have to think of, if it's a picture book, I can let the illustrator show my body. That is not me, but images. I don't have to tell everything. If I'm writing a novel, I have to describe everything. But when you're telling a story, what the audience, what the listeners reads as the text is you. There's no fixed text. It's like we're not memorizing words from a book and then adding gestures to them. That's like acting. And acting is a wonderful art form and an important one. But actors are like classical musicians. They're playing the notes that are written and giving them life. But storytellers are like jazz musicians. The text only exists in the telling. And you are the text that the audience is going to read, which means every movement you make, everything you do is read as part of the story. So if you're telling a heroic tale and your hands shaking because we all get stage fright, and the audience will read the truth of the shake over words because we trust gesture over language every time. Every time. Think about it. If someone says, if you're a teacher and the child says, the dog ate the homework, if you believe that every time and aren't checking body language, the blinking of their eye, the pulse of their neck, the way where they're looking, how they're holding their feet, you're not getting the whole story and you're a fool, really. If someone says, I love you, you're reading body language. If you just fell for the words every time, you'd be quite vulnerable in this world. So we learn early on to trust language, to trust gestural languages over verbal languages. And this probably has an evolutionary base. Gestural languages go much, much deeper into the biosphere than spoken languages. I mean, if you go, no! A dog does not have to look it up in a dictionary. They know what you mean. As will a little child. Children read us all the time. You don't have to tell them that you're sad. You don't have to tell them that you're happy. You don't have to tell them that you love them. You don't have to, I mean, it's nice to do those things, but when you're upset, a child knows it, as does a cat or a dog. So gestural languages go much deeper into who we are. And when you're standing there in front of the audience, they're going to read everything you do as part of the story, as a gestural language that either confirms and affirms what you're saying or plays against it. So if you're like shaking when you're telling a heroic tale, you've got several options for the audience to get from that. One is that you're just undercutting, you're being ironic in what you're telling. Or maybe the hero isn't as heroic as they say they are. Maybe that's part of the story. Or maybe the audience becomes sympathetic toward you because you're the hero telling the story despite your anxiety. There's all kinds of subtext going on which begin to overwhelm the text of the story that you're presenting in language. So, because of this, let's also accept that words are gestural, as I demonstrated with no. So your voice tone, your pace, the loudness and softness of your voice, even your word choice, because we're not memorizing stories. And that's what we're going to get to. What is storytelling? How is it different from acting or something like that? Your word choice is all part of the gesture that language is part of. So even verbal languages have gestural elements, and we have to use them because the audience, individually, we're all, various degrees of stupid and smart. But when you put a bunch of people together, they become like one genius. and they can read emotion and language very immediately. And that's what we're speaking to when we're telling stories, that genius of humanity that's sitting in front of us. So let's see. The other thing I'd like to say as preface to all of this is that storytelling is, to my mind, it's truth-telling. It's not simply you're performing and trying to manipulate or get an audience to see something you haven't seen yourself. Storytelling is a sharing of your own vision of the story. And how do we get to that? I think it begins with caring for the story. And the first step of being a storyteller is you're going to find a story you care about. You're going to find a story that speaks to you. You're going to find a story you want to share. And in our world, the real odds are that unless you tell that story, the odds are that no one is ever going to hear that story again. Those are the very real odds that we live with. And that, in part, I think, is very deep motivation for what gets us up standing in front of all those eyes looking at us, which is a kind of nerve-wracking experience if you're just doing it without this motivation of care behind you. So you start with, it's like cooking. You need some heat. And the heat for cooking a story is your care for it. And it spoke to you. And those odds that no one will ever hear this story that you care about unless you tell it. So you start with that. And what I do, is if I find a story that I really love, I read it over and over. I just read it over and over until I can see it in my mind. I'm not memorizing the words on the page. I'm seeing it in my own mind, in my own way. The words on a page are very mysterious. They create images in us, but they're just squiggles on a piece of paper. So you're entering a mystery in this process right off the bat. And I read it over till I can see it. And then this is where the challenge begins. I shut the book and I try and tell myself, turn what I'm seeing in my mind in images, I have no language yet, into words for myself. I just begin narrating to myself what I'm seeing. And maybe I'll get a quarter of the way into the story and I'll lose it. I don't remember what happens next. I haven't told this story yet. So I stop there. I reopen the book. I read, oh, yeah, that's what happens next. And then I go back to the beginning. I don't start where I fell off the tightrope of language. I go back to the beginning, like a tightrope walker, and start again. And now I get past that point. Maybe I get a little further. And then I go, and then, oh, wait, what happens? So I open the book again. I look, oh, yeah, that's what happens. And I keep doing that, going back to the beginning each time, so that by the time I get all the way across that story, I've gone through it many times. And I have a visualization of it. It's my own version of the story I'm seeing. I'm not memorizing someone else's words. And I've got my own initial thread of language. But of course, that's only where the story begins. Because you can't just sit home and practice that, because you may get a version that works well for you, but it doesn't work well for listeners who are going to be all different kinds of people, all different heads, all different spaces they're coming from. So what you have to do then is take that thread of language that you can get across, and it makes sense to try it out at home on a willing partner or with the dog or the cat or anything with eyes that'll look at you and like the attention. And you just go through it a couple of times till you're sure at least you can get across that entire tightrope. And then you have to start telling it to other people. You have to start being a storyteller. And as you do that, the story, it grows. Not that it becomes longer, but it gets deeper. In other words, your images get sharper, and your ability to understand the patterns of the story start gelling. Plus, you begin to have the freedom of seeing what happens in people's faces at different points of the story, which means you can, because you've really seen it. It's like telling someone what happened on your way to the meeting tonight. You didn't have to memorize that. You can modify it depending if you're talking to a child, depending if you're talking to a close friend, depending if you're talking to a stranger who said, what happened to you on your way here? In other words, you begin to have a freedom in telling that story because it's yours. And so many people, when they think of getting up, we all do actually, if I'm honest, when you think of getting up on a stage, you want to be safe. And so the first place we tend to go with stories is to get something together and then kind of stick to it, kind of memorize maybe the words you've seen in the book, or memorize portions of something you've seen in a book. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't refrains in stories that you do want to have on tap and memorize. But that's only set in a context of your freedom of your own version of the story that you're telling. And the problem with memorization, because we're going to kind of get to where this all leads to with gesture, is that it seems to be safe, but it's actually the riskiest route you can take. There's a couple of basic problems with memorizing a story. Now, you might memorize it because you just love it and you don't want to mess it up. And you might memorize it because you thought the words in that book were just perfect, just the best way to tell that story. And you're just enamored of it. But you're putting yourself at risk by doing it in several ways. First is, you're putting fear in charge. And again, an audience is a kind of genius. And you put yourself at risk because if you screw up anything in the story, you lose a word, you lose a sentence. And believe me, it can happen. It can even be if you've told a similar story and you kind of go on automatic for a minute with something memorized, you can take a bridge that's very similar in one story and walk across it and find yourself starting to run into the language of another story, one of the runs in another story, because sometimes stories are very similar. Now, if you've memorized, there's a panic that begins at that moment, and the audience begins to read your gestural language. There's a discomfort that you're building into the possibility of error if you screw up with a memorized story. We'll get to a little bit more about that. But you are the text, so the audience begins to read anxiety. The other problem with memorization is that you're a tape recorder. You're going to repeat what you've done. Whereas in storytelling, because it's coming out of what you've seen, the more you tell the story, the clearer your images become to yourself. The more you begin to understand the story. The more you tell it with different kinds of audience, you begin to see what holds it together for everyone, what its real core. And as that happens, your word choice, your gestural languages will shift to get closer to the heart of that story. In other words, that story is helping you grow up as a creative human being. And there's no end to that process. And that only comes through putting yourself out there and telling the story from what you've seen. You're bringing your vision of that story into this world. And it's a risk. It is. But there's a creative payoff. There's a very central Japanese folktale, Urashima Taro, or Urashima Taro. It's a story about a young man. It's very familiar, and here's a weird connection, if you're into story connections. The Irish story of the Wanderings of Oisin is almost identical. Now, these two cultures had no historic connection, and these are old stories, but they were both island cultures at the end of a continent. They were both warrior and poetic cultures, very spiritual cultures in their own ways, And they have almost its identical story. So Urashima Taro, there's a young fisherman in the Wonders of Oshin. It's the hero Oshin. And he meets a woman from under the sea. And he does this kind deed, saves a turtle in the Japanese version. And she offers him to go over the sea with her, which turns out to be really under the sea, and to live there with the ever young. In Ireland, there's a whole tradition of the ever young. Anyway, he goes, and he's there, and it's quite magical and quite wonderful. And then after 3 years, he begins to realize, in the Urashima Taro Japanese version, that he never told anyone. He just went off over the sea one day when he was out there fishing because of this kind deed he did, and he took up the offer, and there he was. But he never told his parents. He never told his family, never told his friends, and he realizes he's got to go home and let people know he's alive, where he's been. He's been gone for 3 years, and let them know everything's okay. And the woman he's now married to from under the sea, the beautiful princess from under the sea, says, all right, you can go home, but I'm going to give you this box, and it's a black lacquer. You ever see Japanese lacquer? Beautiful lacquer wooden box, tied with this silken cord, very, beautifully knotted. She says, take the box and keep it with you always. It'll help you come back to me, but you must never open the box. So now we're in a primal admonition tale, don't open the box, Pandora. Don't eat from the tree, Adam and Eve. We've been down this road. We know. Our hairs are already standing up. When you tell somebody, don't, human beings, and our story's recorded, it always ends up, I don't know if you remember Tweety Bird when you were a kid, the cartoon, Tweety Bird and Sylvester. Tweety Bird would go, do I do's it or do I not do's it? And then Tweety Bird would go, I do's it. So don't open the box. I'll never open the box. He gets in the boat. He's rowing home. Now, if you've memorized the story, you could drop that line. She never tells him, don't open the box. She never actually says, here's the box, maybe. So he's rowing along, and you realize you're in the story and you never told your listeners about the box. If you memorize it, you're really trapped. What do you do now? Because how do you insert yourself into patterns that you've got formed and memorized without having to rush back and reboot to an earlier part of the story? So you're thrown. Now, if you visualize the story, you see it in your own mind, you realize, I left out that part. There's any number of creative, so you're going to be in touch with your own creativity. And that's what an audience will read, creativity. And that's what empowers them. There's any number of solutions to how you would get the box in the story. So let me ask you, how would you get the box in the story at that moment if you forgot to put it in? But you fortunately visualized, not memorized it. So what do? What would you do in that situation? Yeah, way in the back, nice and loud. Oh, it's so hard to hear you. My goodness. See if you can, you may have to come right up to the mic on this. Sorry, I didn't think of that.
So as you were telling that, something just popped into my mind because
Sure.
I've done that stories, as you all have. That's kind of important. They need to know that. I thought to myself, as he's rowing, he's daydreaming and he's thinking about his love and all the goodbyes and love and happy trails, all of that. And he remembers, and then I received this box and her.
Yes. Yeah, that works great. It's like, oh yes, and this is the beautiful box she gave me, and I promised her I'd never open it because if I don't open it, it'll be easier to get back to her. So yes. Or a seagull drops the box and says into the boat and says, this is a gift from the princess from under the sea. She says, keep it by you always and never open it. It'll help you. Thank you, seagull. Or a dolphin pushes it up out of the ocean. And you have all kinds of solutions. It doesn't impede or ruin the story at all. It becomes your creative solution to the problems that we all face in life. You're in touch with something, and that story is yours, and that'll work. So we're not tape recorders when we're telling stories, and we're not simply actors memorizing a text and then adding gestures, because the gestures themselves are going to emerge out of what we've seen and what we feel about the story. So all that seem sensible, clear? Good, 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 good. So there's another, well, I think that kind of covers that. I guess one other aspect of it is that as we continue to tell stories, if you've memorized, doing it again and again becomes a repetition, which may or may not be interesting to what happens if you've got memorized text. But without memorized text, with visualized story inside you, I think every time you tell it becomes an adventure, becomes a journey, becomes an exploration. And that excitement is also what the audience feels. Not a repetition, but a journey that we're on together. And that's partly, I think, why storytelling has had such power through the millennia. It's really quite a mysterious art form. So the essence of the art, to sum up this kind of section, is that we see images in our own mind. We find words and gestures that reflect, essentially, the gestures that our face, our bodies are essentially just reflecting what we've actually seen. We're not trying to manipulate an audience. We're simply sharing with them what we've seen because it is ours. It has become our experience. And we can also, because of this, watch the audience. So every audience will have places where some things are clearer to them that might be different from another audience, which doesn't, other things might be clearer to them. And so you can watch the audience, and then if you need to add more information for this group or less information for that group to make the story work, then you're free to do that. So you have a freedom in telling the story if you work from visualization rather than memorization. So with that all as a foundation, let's look at gestures. By the way, anyone have any questions at this point about anything so far that you want to go into or bring up or disagree with, whatever you want? Okay. So there really, as far as I can tell, only 4 things that gestures can really do for art storytelling. And the good news is that once you know what those 4 things are, you can essentially forget them because they're going to happen naturally. But just to be aware of them, I think, helps empower what we do and the choices we make when we're telling stories. So there are 4 modes of gesture, essentially. And I think the first one is the simplest, which is simply, and I'm going to get something. I want to show you something. I'll tell you about this, and then I'm going to grab a photograph someone took when I was doing some storytelling. I was storyteller in residence for the Rochester City Schools back in the early 80s. It was really interesting. I got to work with kindergarten one day, high school the next day, 5 days a week, 3 performances a day, and then teaching storytelling to these same groups in a 14-week program that then renewed itself. So it was really an interesting, it was really a long story how that happened. It's a kind of rare event, but that was the foundation of really learning how to tell stories with all different kinds of ages and groups. But one of the stories that I was telling that became my first picture book back in 1985 was a Buddhist Jataka, past life story of the Buddha, which I called Foolish Rabbit's Big Mistake. The book was illustrated by Ed Young, who was one of the great American illustrators. I was very fortunate. But it's a very old story. It's like 2,500 years old. And in it, and you'll recognize it's like, there's the Western version, Chicken Little. where Chicken Little thinks the sky is falling, and. But see, Chicken Little is a cautionary tale, because who do they run into? Well, they run into the fox, and the fox uses his strength to take advantage of others. In the oldest version, which is the story out of India 2,500 years ago, it's the animals think the earth is breaking up because an apple has fallen behind a rabbit who's kind of been daydreaming. And he hears this sound, and he's been thinking about dangers and whatever because he's a rabbit, and goes, the earth's breaking up, and he starts running. And pretty soon you got 100 rabbits running, and then they run past a bear, and you've got 100 bears running. They're all terrified. The earth's breaking. Then they run past an elephant, and the elephant starts running. And now pretty soon you get 100 elephants charging along. You got all these animals terrified because of one foolish thought in one person's mind. This is an interesting story. This is kind of how things happen in life, isn't it? Anyway, they're running along, and they run past the snake. And the snake says, say what's happening, and they say the earth's breaking up, and the snake is terrified, and he starts. But if you just say that, there's no story. It's all like a preface for what's going to happen. The story hasn't happened yet. If I just say, so the snake said, say, what's happening? And they all go, the earth's breaking up, and the snake started sliding to, and you're still waiting for something to happen. But storytellers are present. Storytellers show you what's happening, and they show it now. So instead of just saying, the earth's breaking, say what's happening, and they go there, you go, say what's happening. And the imagination is so powerful that for a multi-second, a fragment of a second, your imagination, the mind, is so powerful. You believe there's not just me here in this room. You saw a snake. Now, if you've done that for all the animals, which you do in telling the story, everyone is completely present with the story, and you actually believe there's a snake here. The gesture makes the snake real. What is it? It's a snake. And you believe that there is a snake. It just takes a fraction of a second, and the mind will build on that and hold in memory a snake, and that the story is really happening, not, well, he's telling words and I'm waiting for the action to begin. No, you're there. So I want to show you this picture. Hang on, I'll be right back. A photograph someone took. So this is back in probably 1983, long time ago. Can you see this okay? Is it visible? So those kids are watching a snake. And to me, that was like just one of the moments where I really understood, looking at those kids' faces, what storytelling was. That's me telling the story. I was obviously younger then, and those kids were so into it. There's a snake. I'm not just talking about a snake. There's a snake in the room, and they knew it. And to me, there was just something so iconic about that. About that's our job right there. So the first mode or gesture or level of gesture or mode of gesture is, what is it? If I spend all my time telling you what it is, we wander off into the weeds. There's no real story there. I'm still waiting for the story to happen. But if my gesture can nail it, can show you, we're in the story. We're not waiting. We're there. And we believe it's a snake, or it's a tree, or it's a whatever. So that's the first thing. The second mode or level, we might say, of gesture is, who is it? You see, again, if you're writing a novel or a short story, you have to describe things because the only tool is language. But if you're there, you are the text. The audience will read you and trust your gestures to be truer even than things you say. So you work with that, you build on that. Now we can tell somebody who a character is, not by saying, oh, it's a good person or it's a bad person, because storytelling is a life skill. Nobody in actual life wears a label. I'm the good person. I'm the bad person. We find out who people are by what they do and by what they say. And storytelling is an art form that emerges out of human life and empowers us to go back into life, restored to deal with the things that are on our plate. So who is it? There's a Gullah, so that's the Georgia Seacoast Islands people. There was a story called Alligator's Sunday Suit. So the story is like when the world was new long ago, Alligator didn't look like he looks now. He wasn't all green and hard and bumpy. No, he wore a beautiful, nice, neat, white, clean-pressed Sunday suit. And his life wasn't hard the way our lives are now. I mean, now if you want to get something to eat, you have to get a job. You have to earn money. You have to take that money and go to a store. You have to read all the labels on the cans and packages very carefully. Then you have to take that money you worked so hard for and you have to give it to the cashier. And then you have to lug things out to your car. And then you have to drive through traffic maybe. And then you get home and then you have to carry things in. And then finally you have to open stuff up and then put them and cook. No, that wasn't how it was when the world was new. No, you see, Alligator, he just kind of lie out on the stream and you just kind of drift along with the current. And then he just open up his mouth real wide and all the little fish would just kind of swim right in. And then wham! He just swallow him down. Now, I don't have to tell you that you might not want to get too close to Alligator. I let the gesture show you. You figure it out. You've got skills. You've lived a life. Even children would get it. But they think it's funny. Whereas adults go, yeah, I've met somebody like that. So it's like you work with our skills as a human being, and the gesture will show you who the character is, without you stepping outside and saying, oh, once there was this mean or cruel or selfish or whatever it was, alligator. No. You give them the alligator and let your audience see it for themselves. So, let's see if there's anything there. Now, then the third, might say mode of gesture. So we got a lot of W's here. Fortunately, there's 4 W's. It makes it easy to remember and then to forget. The first is, what is it? Then we got, who is it? Third one is, where is it? Because you're mostly going to be telling stories in a room just like the room you're in. You're not going to be, well, let's say there's a Navajo story called Big Long Man and Mountain Lion. And it kind of opens with Big Long Man and Mountain Lion are out walking in the desert, and Mountain Lion and they come to big tall pine tree, and Mountain Lion suddenly says, I'm the best climber. No one can climb this tree as good as me. And he sticks out his claws and stabs him right into the tree, and then up the tree goes higher and higher and higher until he gets, well, not quite to the top because he's big, he's heavy. He can't get on the thin little branches at the very top of that tree, so he perches on a thicker branch below the top, and there he sits feeling very proud of himself indeed, and he looks down, way down there, and there's big long man standing there looking up. Mountain lion looks down and goes, I'm the best, you're no good, I'm the best climber. And big long man says, well, you're bigger than me, mountain lion, you're stronger than me, but you're not the best. You have your way, I have my way, and once I start climbing, my way is I won't stop until I get to the very top. And he put his hand up on the branch above him, and he put his other hand on the branch above that, and then slowly, steadily, up and up and up and up and up that tree. He went higher and higher and higher till he got right past Mountain Lion. He got to the very top, and there he swayed back and forth at the top of that tree, feeling very content with his place in this world indeed. Now, there's no high and low in this room at all. It's all flat. We're sitting in a square box, me on my side of the screen, you on yours. All the high and lows are in the mind. And your gesture allows you to feel that there's really elevation and things farther down, and there's a potential danger. You can fall from heights. You're no longer safely just sitting in a chair. Things are actually happening. So where is it? If you're in a small, closed space, then your voice is going to be small and your body tight. If you're in a big open space, your gestures can be expansive and your voice projected. The audience subconsciously reads the text you're presenting gesturally. And it's not just words once they were climbing a tree and he was way up there. They experience it. There's an original story of mine that became a picture book called Will's Mammoth. The original story version was The Boy Who Loved Mammoths. And when I've told that story, it's set in ice and snow, obviously, with the mammoth. It's a children's story. But I've seen people reach for shirts and sweaters on a hot summer's day because they felt they were in ice and snow in their minds. Again, this is the power of the told story. And the only tools we have, it's so amazing, are body, speech, and mind. I cannot think of a more minimalist art form that has more power. And there it is, it's right there. And again, if you're working with children, how few children get that experience these days of the power of language. Most of them are told what to do in language, they're given orders, they're yelled at in language, and they're put in front of TVs and computer screens because it's easier, to be honest, for keeping kids quiet and occupied. They'll just watch, but they don't get the language that brings things alive. And language, every child is a genius when it comes to language. Every child you'll ever work with or see taught themselves how to speak their mother tongue, whatever that mother tongue is. And that is seen as more creative or as equally a creative act as writing all of Shakespeare's plays and all of Beethoven's symphonies. And they did it because they intrinsically loved language. But then it gets diminished in our culture. So again, by storytelling, you're keeping a gate open to very, very important human territory. Without it, children don't ever develop their own vision like you do with telling a story. They get other people's images implanted into them, and they're never in touch with themselves. So storytelling is a terrifically important art. And the empowerment that gesture offers to simply words themselves multiplies that exponentially. So the fourth mode, we might say, of told stories, of the gestural aspect of told stories, is really, the only word I have for it is like, wah! So we got, who is it? What is it? Who is it? Where is it? And wah! Because that wah is really the emotional contract. And there's a rhythm. This has to do with the rhythm of telling a story. When you're telling a story, your gestures, your voice, there's a certain rhythmic pattern. It's like in poetry, that's known as basic rhythmic pattern for English poetry is the iambic pentameter. Unaccented, accented, unaccented, accented. 5 times. Iambic, 5, pentameter. That's the normal line. But in poetry, there's what's called the trochee, which is the reversal of the iamb. And that is accented, unaccented. And when you're getting into, you're kind of, the lulling of the iambic is like a heartbeat. Lub-dub, 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 lub-dub. And our gestures become, we fall into certain rhythms in telling stories. There's a pattern, a rhythm we're establishing. But the trochee breaks that rhythm, and it can mean, in a poem, it can mean fear, it can mean joy, it can mean horror. The heartbeat is reversed, and it's a strong emotion. And depending on the context of the poem, it could be a happy, a positive, or a negative strong emotion. But the trochee is the reversal of the heart. In storytelling, we do that with the rhythm of our gestures and the rhythm of our voice and voice tones. So there's another Japanese tale that I've always been intrigued by and loved called The Boy Who Drew Cats. Maybe you know the story. Lafcadio Hearn did great versions of many of the Japanese tales. So in The Boy Who Drew Cats, there's this little boy. And obviously he's got a family, but there's a famine. And people are hard-pressed to keep their families alive. And there was a tradition, it was in China and Japan, that children, boys especially, could be sent to local temple or monastery. They'd be raised by the monks, they'd be educated, they'd get food, but their parents might not see them again. But it would be a way of keeping them alive during this very difficult time. The parents finally decide this is what they have to do. So they bring this boy to the temple, and he's a very intelligent boy, very obviously so, and they say, yes, okay, we can take him in, we can train him to be a monk, he can survive, we'll have rice for him, and the parents, it's very sad, they have to say goodbye. So the little boy is there, but see, this boy has one thing he just loves doing. He loves to draw, and in Japan, that means an ink brush, brush, an ink stick, you grind it up, water, pour it on a grinding stone, you grind up the ink, you dip in your brush, and he loves drawing cats. I mean, that's his thing. It's like he can't help himself. He sees an empty wall or an empty page, and he's drawing cats. Well, in the monastery, that won't work. Everybody has a job, and everyone has to participate, and if you're ruining the shoji, the Japanese rice paper walls, or the pages in the sutra book, it's like, no, 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 no. So they warn the boy a couple of times, and yet he just spontaneously does it again. He can't help himself. So he's called in to the abbot, and he's told, look, you can't stay here. You're going to have to leave. All I can do is give you advice. He says, stay in large places. Don't stay in small places. And he sets the boy out on the road, and the boy realizes he's really in danger now. And he makes up his mind. I'm gonna go to this great big temple I know of, not maybe 10 miles, 15 miles away. And I will do everything. I will cook, I will clean, I will chop wood, and I won't draw cats anymore because I'm going to survive. And he makes up his mind, that's what's going to happen. And he heads off to this other temple. But what he doesn't know is that temple had been abandoned. And that a goblin now lived in this abandoned temple. And when travelers would go into that abandoned large temple and go to sleep there on the floor, the goblin would creep out along the floors. And while they were all sleeping, it would gobble them up! So, now, what's happened is adrenaline has really been released into your bloodstream. The electric pulse of your brain has changed. You cannot siphon that stuff out of your system. You're welded to the story. Your heartbeat rhythm has totally changed. You are enmeshed in that story. Plus, somewhere we each know that little boy is us. He doesn't exist. He's a figment of language. I just created him with sounds on the air. But each one of us knows there's this creative aspect of ourselves, like a child, full of creative passion. And in this world, that child is in danger. And it's going to have to find its own way to survive. And we care about that child. And now we are welded to the story. We want to know what happens to that child who is in danger. And that is the wah of what gestures can do. You're working with the rhythm of your telling, and then you're creating a reversal that ties people emotionally into the story. So let's see if there's anything else about that. No, we actually now really care about what's going to happen to that boy, that child. And the wonderful thing, of course, is, in one sense, the child doesn't exist at all, and in another very real sense, that child really, really does exist. So now you can forget all this, because this will all happen naturally if you're visualized, if you care about the story, if you care about your listeners in terms of sharing with them, not trying to manipulate them into seeing something you haven't that you've memorized from a page, but you're sharing a vision that's come alive for you of this story. And here's a little piece of motivation. I mentioned that the key to this all is really motivation, because there will always be things that make you think, oh, I'll do it next time. But there comes a moment where you have to get up and start telling that story. So here's a little story from a friend of mine. It's a true story. I was an architect in Mexico. He told me this story about either he was in high school or one of his kids was in high school. Or anyway, the class took a trip down to maybe the Yucatan or one of the jungles where there are the pyramids. Have you ever seen the Mexican pyramids? Yeah. So that was their class trip. They went down for a weekend to. And I don't know if you've ever been on those pyramids, but I have. And the steps are very, very narrow. People's feet are small. So when you're going, and they're steep. So it's almost like climbing a ladder without your hands. You're just going like straight up with just about half your foot sitting on the step. So all the kids and their high school teacher get up to the top. And they're up there for a while and it's starting to get dark. Sun is setting over the jungle. And all the kids, they go down. It's like walking straight down a wall. They don't have a problem with it. They're high school kids. They go down. The teacher freezes up at the top. The teacher cannot do it. So all the kids are at the bottom. They're yelling for the teacher to come down. He can't. He's terrified. There's a little watchman's hut at the base of the pyramid. So they go and they knock on the door, and this old guy comes out, and they say, our teacher is stuck up at the top. He's frightened. He can't come down. It's dark. He says, I'll get him. He lights a lantern, and he starts up, and they see the lantern bobbing up the steps of the pyramid all the way to the top. And then what happens up at the top is the guy with the lantern, he finds the teacher up there. He pulls out a gun. And he points it at the teacher, and he says, start climbing down or I'll blow your brains out. And the teacher climbed down. So the secret is motivation. With the right motivation, you can overcome whatever's scaring you about getting up on a stage and telling a story. And your motivation is you care about this story, and the odds are, if you don't tell it, nobody's ever going to hear or see this story again. So that's the gun you're going to put to yourself, and you will climb down from wherever you're hiding out, and you'll get out there and tell the story. So that's about all I've got to say. Anybody, any questions you'd like to bring up? Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really fun to be with you. I haven't done anything like this for a long time, so it's really, it was a kind of fun thing to look over all my sense of what's really at the core of storytelling and how can I share that. So I hope you will continue what you're doing, and I think it's really impressive that you're keeping the storytelling community alive, meeting regularly, and talking about what makes stories work and sharing them. So anybody have any questions or any things they'd like to bring up before we have to part? Yeah, way in the back. You may have to come up front because the microphone, I don't think, is picking you up well. Now, can you come up close to the computer? Yeah. Too bad. I had thought about it. Maybe there was a plug-in mic we could have got.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can hear you good now. Well now.
The name of the story about the boy who was out on the sea for 3 years.
Urashima Taro. Urashima-Taro. Urashima Taro. It is probably the most famous folktale in all of Japan. And it is almost identical, this is the weird thing, to the Wanderings of Oisin, Oisin, in Ireland. In fact, Yeats did a play called The Wanderings of Oisin, which tells almost exactly the same story. I did a book called Mysterious Tales of Japan. Maybe your library's got it, it's long out of print. It was beautifully illustrated, but I think it was 10 of Lafcadio Hearn's Japanese ghostly tales, and Urashima Taro was one of them in that. Otherwise, I'm sure you can almost Google it and you can find versions. It's a great story, yeah. And while you're at it, look up The Wanderings of Oisin from Ireland, and it is eerie how similar these two stories from two places in the world that were never in touch in earlier times, as far as we know. Yeah. So, anybody else? Come on up. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think that Japanese story is in one of the collections that we use a lot here called More Ready to Tell Tales.
I could believe that because it is probably the most central Japanese folktale.
Yeah, but I mean, your version is what's in that book, I think.
Oh, my version.
Yes.
Oh, neat. I hope I got royalties.
It's in that collection where all of the storytellers say, just use these stories,
Yeah.
tell these stories.
Yeah. I've agreed to things like that in the past. I just don't even remember what happened to them. So that's great. I'm glad it's being used and it's out there. And it is a really wonderful story. So I hope you'll do something with it. That's your own. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody have anything else to toss into the pot? Yeah.
We have time. Would you please finish the boy that liked to throw out cats?
Well, I won't
Otherwise-
tell you the whole story. That's also in a lot of versions, but you can find it in my book, Mysterious Tales of Japan. But I'll tell you what happens so you don't worry. But I won't do a performance of it. So he's in there, and he gets into the temple, and we know there's something there. He doesn't. So we've got the overview, whatever that's called, or the character knows less than the audience, right? So we're kind of like this, and the boy's like looking around, and lo and behold, he finds these beautiful Japanese screens, old screen shoji, white rice paper. And he looks at the screens. He can't help himself. He takes out his brush. He goes to the spring outside the door, and there are cobwebs all around. He's cleared them all out to make himself a neat place to lie down there. And, we know, well, he thinks he's doing a good job, but we're worried about him. But he sees the screen. So after he's cleared off the cobwebs, he gets some water, puts it on his grinding stone. He grinds up his ink stick, makes a nice dark ink, black ink, dips in his brush, and over the screens, he covers them. Running cats, leaping cats, fighting cats, dancing cats, playing cats, eating cats, meowing cats, all over the screens. And he looks back, he steps back and goes, oh, I've been trying to draw cats. I've been trying to draw cats, and my cats have come out just perfectly. Just perfectly. I can go to sleep now and feel really at ease because my cats are here. And then he lies down, he's got his little blanket, he's unrolled it, and he's lying down looking up at the screen with his cats, and he feels very content. And then he just remembered, wait, stay in small places. Don't stay in large places. And he's just in this huge hall, this big empty room. He goes, I've got to find a small space, a small space. Maybe I am kind of performing it for you. Anyway, so he goes, yeah, I got to find a small space. And he looks, and behind the screens, there's like a little Japanese kind of cupboard with a sliding paper door front. He goes, that's a small place. I'll go in there. So he takes his blanket and his drawing things, and he opens up the sliding door, and he crawls in, and he slides it closed behind him, and he lies down in there with his things beside him, his drawing things, and he's on his little blanket and covers himself, and he goes to sleep. He falls asleep in this small space. And then late in the night, he hears this horrible screaming and yowling and smashing and crashing and horrible blood-curdling noises. And all the rest of the night, he lies in that little cupboard, just shaking and shaking and shaking, just terrified to think of opening that sliding door and finding what's outside there in the morning, just waiting for him. But in the morning, he's got to get out of that cupboard or he's going to die in there. So he puts one hand up on there and he's got his drawing things and his blanket in his other hand. He pushes that screen back and he looks, but he can't see because he's behind the folding screens. You can't see a thing. So he pushes it back all the way and he creeps out on the floor and he creeps along the screens and he sticks his head out around the screen and oh, God, it's horrible. There's blood all over the floor. There's blood splattered on this, blood sprayed across the screens, and he looks up. Well, first he looks in the middle of that huge room, there's a gigantic rat goblin dead. And then he looks up at the screens, and from every tooth and from every claw of the cats he'd drawn, blood was dripping down the screens. You see, the cats had come to life in the night, and it was those cats who had saved him. Now, after this, the boy went on to become a very great artist, known throughout Japan. But it said that every day, no matter how great he was, he always took out his brush, his ink stick, his grinding stone, poured in the water, ground up his ink, dipped in his brush, and drew at least one cat. And that's the story of the boy who drew cats. Thank you for asking for that. I haven't told that for years, but it's this great image of how the things we love and our own creativity, even though they seem to put us at risk, are the very things that save us in the end. And that's the same with our stories. Trust yourself, find stories you care about, see them for yourself in your own way, and then get out there and share them. And that's how we really grow as human beings and as storytellers. So thank you very much. It was really, really fun for me to be with you. Everybody stay well and please continue your good work. It was really a thrill to be with dedicated storytellers again.